Well, today's agenda here, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and staying safe online. Maybe. There we go. All right. So in today's discussion, we're going to go over and review kind of what the world looks like, the cyber world in 2020. What risks are out there facing you? How do we, learn more, assess those risks? What can you do to mitigate them? And then hopefully any questions and concerns you may have. So we're going to kind of jump through these each in great detail as we go through. So the first thing, and you'll hear me say this a lot, it is my phrase of choice, defining the cyber landscape. So what is a cyber landscape? Well, essentially what I mean by this, and it's just a term I'm using, you can hear it called anything, the cyber world, the digital world, whatever people choose to call it. I like landscape. So the cyber landscape here is devices, anything that is connected to the internet. That has changed greatly over the years. Even 5-10 years ago, everything was a computer. Your desktop in the living room or wherever it may be was the device you had connected to the internet, and the rest of your house was, for the sake of cyber, offline. Well, now we've got, in my house, I have cyber fire alarms, cyber heater, cyber thermostat, all these different things that have changed what we consider the landscape. So when I use that word cyber landscape, that's what I'm talking about, is any device, networked or otherwise, connecting to the internet. So as we look at what that really looks like, these are current numbers. Estimated current global population is 7.8 billion people. 4.6 billion of those people are considered active internet users. 5.2 billion are mobile users, and 4.14 billion are social media users. Interesting takeaway here, and this has changed just very recently actually, is you'll see that mobile users are actually increasing over internet users. So when they're saying that, that's the mobile devices. And a lot of the reason is you may have 1, 2, 3 mobile devices per user. However, the way the system works is it's going to see that as a unique connection and a unique user. Another thing here is we're looking at 4.14 billion social media users. That means the vast majority of people who are online are also using social media. And as we'll get into later, social media, although very valuable, also has its risks and concerns in cyber as well, and it drastically changes the way we use the internet. Let's look a little closer to home here. In the United States, current estimates places at 331 million people. 288.1 million of those are active internet users. And interestingly enough, 353.2 million mobile devices connected in the US. That is actually a 107% when compared to the United States population. That means there are more mobile devices connected than there are people in the United States on any given basis. Again, as we look at that, that really is shifting the way we access the network. We are no longer safe, tucked away in our home office behind a firewall or whatever it may be. We're connecting from iPads, cell phones, on the go, mobile, using cellular data, various Wi-Fi hotspots. These are all things that change the way we view the internet, and those changes are coming up very rapidly. And again, here we've got 230 million social media users, which when you compare that to the 288 million number, safe to say the majority of people connecting to the internet are doing so to use some types of social media. One big thing in 2020 that those numbers don't take into account is COVID. So COVID, as we all know, and as we look at right now, as we're not all in a big room here talking together, has drastically changed the cyber environment that we're looking at. It is estimated, none of these are hard facts, but estimated numbers here that 52% of students will be learning remotely in 2020. These are now people who may or may not have had devices in the past, a lot of young kids who maybe never had a laptop, iPad, what have you, that all of a sudden are being thrown online to do schooling. 42% of the U.S. labor force is now working from home. That opens up, as we'll see later, the world to a whole different type of data connection, data security, and data risk. And we saw actually in Q1 of 2020, a 47.5% increase in broadband usage. That's just data going over the network. And you guys may have noticed that. A lot of countries, thankfully not the U.S. at the time, but Netflix had to lower qualities just due to the sheer amount of people trying to watch TV at home. So it is a drastic change. The way we use the internet has changed, the amounts to which we've used the internet changed, and those numbers are only increasing as these types of situations are expected to continue after things start to slow down. So as more and more people get online, it's expected that more and more people are going to use the online methods to commit crime. So here we're looking at the FTC's report on cybercrime. These next few slides, I'm going to go through quite a few stats, so bear with me a little bit as we talk numbers here. But the top three categories, as you can see, identity theft, imposter scams, telephone and mobile services. We'll go on all these on detail here shortly, but they saw in 2019 1.7 million different instances of reported fraud, 23% of which reported a loss to the tune of $1.9 billion, with the average person experiencing a loss losing about $320. Now, those numbers, we're talking consumer fraud, not business fraud, so that kind of lowers what we've seen. Generally as the stats get thrown around, we're looking solely at consumer level fraud at this stage. Again, as we look at consumer demographics, there's some interesting information here. You can see in total kind of the estimated age brackets, and coincidentally enough, I would argue that these numbers don't kind of go the way people would expect. And the FTC thought the same way. We're actually seeing more fraud in the 30 to 39 age, and the 29 up, kind of what you consider the millennials, and lesser so as we get older. The 60 to 69 is kind of technically the highest, but really surprising. And what that tends to show is that, your normal thought process that, the people who didn't grow up with technology are more likely to get scammed by it doesn't necessarily hold true. And a lot of the thought behind that is, as the more comfortable people get with technology and the more accepting of it they get, we tend to be more likely to be willing to throw our passwords into stuff. We've grown up with the ability to sign in here, put your thumbprint there, get access to this. Oh, you want to link your bank account? We can do that. And that is leading to more likely for people to see fraud, more types of identity theft, more instances of stolen passwords than we see in other generations. A promising stat, as we talked with someone recently here, they're finding that Generation Z, the younger generations, are actually becoming more secure than the generations who kind of experience the rapid growth in technology. And the reason for that is hopefully people are learning from their mistakes. So we're seeing less and less of that in the younger generations and kind of more and more in the middle to older generations. And then our oldest categories here that are tracked, sadly, less theft, but more in terms of loss. So you're looking at the average loss for someone 80 and older is over $1,600, whereas your average 20, 29-year-old is about $500. And a lot of the reason for that is, twofold. Some of the times in those areas you have more money to lose, and also the types of scams, as we'll go into in detail later, are changing as they target those other demographics. So I guess suffice to say, when we look at this data, is no age bracket is really safe. Fortunately, our younger generation seems to be the safest, but it's pretty widespread across all age brackets and higher in some than you may have expected. So we want to get a little closer. We looked at the USA. Let's dig in here and look at what Colorado has to offer. Every year, the FTC ranks all fraud that they get reported for the Consumer Sentinel Network report. This report compiles every reported instance of fraud throughout the U.S., primarily focusing on consumer fraud, which is what we're trying to address here today. When we look at this, we can see Colorado actually ranks 12th in the country, and we are looking at roughly 23.2 million in fraud losses, with the median being slightly above average at $365. When we look at the top types, the imposter scams are number one, and we'll go through this in great detail later on, but a brief overview there. Imposter scam is anytime someone steals money from you pretending to be someone that they're not. That tends to be the most common we'll see in phishing and other reports. Identity theft is number two, and we break that out here down below with credit card fraud, tax fraud, identity theft, phone fraud, and bank fraud. And overall, they kind of go down from there. But really, when we look at these frauds, the debt collection, I would argue, kind of falls under imposter scams. But those top three are really what we see across the whole country. In the bottom right corner, and my map's a little faded here, it looks like, however, but as you'd guess, that square there is Colorado, and the two dots are Denver and Colorado Springs. So that is kind of where the fraud isolated from in primary reporting. I don't think that'll surprise anybody here. And then if we look and kind of zoom back out, and let's see how COVID affects these numbers. Now, remember, the numbers just presented do not include COVID numbers. These reports are all annual, so most annual stats, we're looking at 2019. They take the time to compile them, and then we'll provide them. So if we look at COVID, and these are all off of half of year one or first half of 2020 looking at COVID. We have seen a 600% increase in phishing activity since February, 60,000 daily related COVID attacks, $8 billion of federal relief funds are believed to have already been stolen. That means that $1,200 check, PPP loans, SBA loans, all those federal relief fundings, current estimates in the IRS and others believe that $8 billion of that was stolen or taken ineffectively. Of that number, $40 million directly from the state of Colorado. Overall estimates believe by the time as everything is said and done and all the numbers balance out, the IRS believes that we'll lose close to $26 billion in theft based on that federal relief money. One of the reasons for that is when we look at the COVID claims in Colorado, state officials guess 3/4 or 75% of all claims of fraud or of unemployment are fraudulent. That means people either stole identities of people who were unemployed or were using fake identities, people who had passed away. Whatever it may be, 75% of those are illegitimate. And how many of those actually got the money, they did not say, but I think a lot of that is going to factor into our $40 million number up there. So those bottom numbers are coming straight from the Department of Labor of Colorado. All right, so those are a lot of numbers, and this is the last one of these, I promise. I had a stats teacher who very famously said, stats is how you lie with numbers. And I think a lot of it comes down to how we use those to frame kind of the points we want to make. However, the big thing here, current FBI studies believes that only 1 in 7 cases of cybercrime get reported each year. So when we look at those numbers, on the other hand, now if we assume only 1/7 of those are reported and 6/7 are going unreported, those numbers that I would argue are already kind of creepy get much, much more scary. And the reason for not reporting is very obvious. It's with any crime too. It's embarrassment. People don't want to admit that they were stolen. There's thoughts that they can get it back. In the cases of ransomware and others, you might have paid the ransom or paid whatever it may be, and you don't want to admit it. The FBI explicitly says if you pay those types of things, you're contributing to terrorism. So you're not going to go ahead and say, okay, well, I did pay it. And if you don't want to say you paid it, you probably don't want to report it. So as we look at all these numbers, take for granted, a grain of salt here that we're looking at a small portion of what there really is. Now, is it 1 in 7? It depends. But the takeaway here that I'm trying to make is when we're looking at stats for cybercrime, especially in the consumer realm, the vast majority of things are not getting reported to the FBI, to the FTC, to other organizations. So what that basically does is we kind of define what the landscape looks like. How many computers are online? What is the value here? And the value is to the tune of $1.9 billion. So as a consumer, we have to start to look and say, okay, how do we protect ourselves from this risk? And the key to do that is identify the risk. So find out statistically, how are you going to get scammed? Not to say you will or won't, but if it would happen, what vectors are going to come in and how do you respond? Secondly, when we look at those risks, all right, let's evaluate them. Of the things that are most risky, say, to the general populace, what's more risky to me? Do I use the computer to bank online, trade stocks, do highly financial things? Or am I browsing the internet, searching Facebook, Instagram? Those change your risk levels. So finally, based on what we've seen as the risks, what are pertain to us, we can determine our response. When we determine our response, there's really 4 strategies. And these strategies are pulled straight out of how we do business in kind of the corporate IT world. When you look at government regulations, state regulations, really the NIST, the ISOs, the frameworks by which we create cyber policy, the concept of risk is always defined with 4 strategies. And this is true of any piece of risk. You can avoid it, you can mitigate it, transfer it, or accept it. And when we break those down, I'm going to start at the bottom here and start with accept. Accepting a risk means, essentially by plugging your computer into the internet, you're accepting a certain level of risk. You're saying that to use the internet, to be able to go online, to get the benefits that it gives me, I'm going to accept that there's some risk there. Maybe there's nothing you can do. And quite frankly, by plugging into the internet, you're taking on a lot of risk that there's not much you can do about. You can transfer risk. You can hire somebody to take that risk off your shoulders. You can say, hey, I'm going to pay my neighbor once a week to come in and scan my network for vulnerabilities, to look for viruses. I'm going to go to Geek Squad and have them take a look. Transferring risk is great. but it doesn't transfer responsibility. At the end of the day, if you go to Geek Squad once a week, I don't recommend that, by the way. I would strongly discourage you from going once a week. But if you did, you're saying, great, Best Buy, I trust you to transfer this. But at the end of the day, if your identity gets stolen, that doesn't hurt Best Buy any. So you're transferring that risk. Now, remember, you can transfer risk, not responsibility. Mitigate, my favorite strategy here, is do something to get around it, to limit the chance that risk will go through. Things like antivirus, other tools you can use to lower the risk that these things affect you. Lastly, avoidance. Avoid is pretty effective if you're good at it. I could unplug my computer from the network. I could put it on airplane mode. That is great if you don't need to use the internet. Your chances of getting cyber fraud go down considerably if you're not using cyber-related products. However, avoid is also the least acceptable option because, quite frankly, it doesn't get you what you need to do. So those are the 4 areas we're going to kind of think about when we look at accepting and moving on, responding to risk. So to start that off, let's look at, as a consumer, what are the biggest risks to you? Now, I will preface this. I did not put these in order of highest to lowest risk. I, have my personal opinions, and as we go through, I might slip up and kind of tell you what I think directly as far as, realistically, this is going to get you more than the other. However, statistically speaking, these are the kinds of things that I think you're going to deal with most on a day-to-day basis. Now, remember, these are cyber fraud, and we'll kind of break into kind of more business email compromise. I'm going to kind of put an asterisk by as that changes, but these are the types of cyber-related risks that are most likely to affect you. And as we go through, you can decide for yourself which ones you think are the most pertinent. We're going to start with my personal favorite, ransomware. Ransomware was all the rage in 2016. It was the day and age where you turned on the TV and people were talking about smart TVs getting ransomware. Smart fridges were getting ransomware. If your device connected to the internet, there was a decent chance someday you were going to turn your computer on, turn your fridge on, turn on the TV, and see a message like you see here on the left. Now, these messages change. There are tons of different ransomware variants. This one is the current winner of Ryuk, I guess pronunciation there, RYUK ransomware. And what ransomware does is when you get ransomware on your computer, it goes through and scans your device, be it your computer, your fridge. I'm going to say computer for the sake of this, but just know it can hit any device connected to the internet. And what it does is it analyzes your files, folders, and all your contents. It looks for certain file types. And the list of file types is usually quite long. In the case of Ryuk, it is pages and pages long. So we're talking Word documents, picture files, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, configuration files. It has a laundry list of things it's looking for to try to convert those files. So when it goes through and scans your network, anything that comes back saying, okay, if this is a PDF, I'm going to encrypt it and turn it into a .locky something else so your computer doesn't know how to read it. Now, as we've learned, in the past, and we'll talk about in detail here going forward, encryption is great. Encryption is what stops bad guys from seeing your data. Well, in the case of ransomware, encryption is what keeps the bad guys from letting you see your data. And decrypting ransomware, unlike the TV shows when you see in 24 or whatever or whatever's on, they have some cyber guy sweating from the forehead, types for 5 minutes and decrypts it. Modern encryption is unbreakable. Now, I say unbreakable. To be currently rated as good level encryption, you'll see AES 256 quite commonly. That means that you can't decrypt it without the passcode. So in most shows, they'll say, oh, we got it, it's decrypted, whatever it may be. In real life, they're really hoping they can guess the passcode. Now, in most ransomware cases, they're using a key. And that key can be as long as 256 characters. And you'll see kind of, if you look at this message where he's saying AES 256, it's using a 256 character key. Your ability to guess a 256 character password is near impossible. We're talking on a scale of billions of years if you're guessing one character at a time. So what that means is your files are in serious trouble if you get with ransomware. Now, the semi-positive side of ransomware is they're going to give you the option to buy your files back. If you're reading this message, and you don't have to, it's littered with grammatical errors and typos. But basically what they're saying is, hey, pay us Bitcoin, we'll give you your files back. The amount of Bitcoin generally varies. They tend to know who they're going after. So for a consumer, the average price tends to be around $300 a computer. In corporate environments, it can go into the millions. There have been some recent payments to the tune of $35 million to get corporate data back. And when you pay that money, you're taking a gamble. Ransomware is a service that, done well, Ryuk, some of these very high professional cases, it works great. They'll give you your password and you can unlock it. Others, people who might not have figured it out as much, they didn't really figure out the encryption part. You'll get a password. That password will do nothing, and they'll stop returning your emails. So you're taking a big gamble there. So that's kind of what ransomware is. Well, ransomware is changing. Since 2016, they have found, and I say they, these are very serious organizations. When we look at Ryuk, some of these others, they are coming out of nation states, or you'll hear the term APT a lot. This means Advanced Persistent Threat. These are groups that make their money doing this. They're very well. They have help desks. They have support lines. They hire people online to work for these organizations. So they really know what they're doing, and they have found that your average consumer is not the moneymaker behind ransomware. For the most part, people don't have the types of data that you're going to pay a ton of money for. You might have pictures, and you might really want them back, and so that's $300. When the other end of the table is 35 million, they know where they're going. So if we look at ransomware attacks year over year, it's going down. They're calling it big game hunting. If you listen to the kind of nerdy podcasts I've been tending to listen to, they say, hey, I can go after, mom and pop, I can hit a TV, but if I can hit a network, Toyota, Honda, some of these big ones that have had ransomware attacks, I'm looking at millions, if not billions of dollars. So the good news as a consumer, I would argue your risk is going down here. However, it is definitely something to keep in the back of your mind. Ransomware is a huge issue if you get it. Thankfully, as a consumer, your risk levels of getting it are really low. However, when we look at some of these stats, every 11 seconds, a ransomware attack is being sent out. So, they might think they're hitting the consumer and hit you, or they might hit a corporation and send it out from them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But this is definitely something to keep on your radar as we go forward. And we will, like I said, we'll talk about what you can do here shortly. Secondly, malware. Now, malware, if I would argue, this rate's a little higher than ransomware. And now, semantics, you could argue, well, ransomware is malware. Yes, it is. But it's unique, so I put it in its own category. But when we look at malware here, these stats are from Malwarebytes, which is, as I'll talk about later, a very good antivirus tool. When we look at global detections, look where consumer is compared to business. Granted, it's going down, but we're still looking at over 40 million instances in 2019. And I can promise you that number in 2020 is going to be astronomically higher. It just is. We are seeing those spikes overall. Malware is defined as malicious software, and that is a wide-reaching term. And as we look on the far right here is the top categories. Each one of these things is, although very different, considered to be malware. Let's start at the top here. Adware. Adware is quite possibly what I would argue the most common. Well, obviously it's the most common because it's at the top of the list, but most common one, but also the least concerning. Adware is extremely prevalent. Every time I've hopped on my mother's PC to help her with it, I can guarantee you without a semblance of a doubt, I will remove at least a dozen cases of adware. What adware does is it gets onto your network and gets into your browser, and it's going to bring up more ads than you know what to do with. If you type into your browser something and you go to all of a sudden through Yahoo.com search engine and 3 ads pop up, you have adware. You'll see it a lot. A lot of common symptom is, like I said, all of a sudden you'll have a bunch of tabs when you open, say you open Google Chrome and 6 tabs open up and they're all ads and all these things are popping up. You probably have adware. At some point, something you downloaded tacked on a tool of adware that's going to pop up with ads. Adware is wide-ranging and is not always considered malware. Some companies will do it on purpose. One that I like to point out, and I'm not bashing anybody or trashing, but this was a case that made the news. Geek Squad used to install, if you took your computer to Geek Squad as part of their coverage, they installed a Best Buy tool that would, monitor your computer. What it also did would pop up Best Buy ads when you signed into the browser. That is adware. So let's just put it this way. If you get a virus, that's the one you want. It's very annoying and you don't need it, but not going to do a ton of harm. The next one, on the other hand, much more severe, Trojan. This takes its name from the very famous Trojan horse. It is this is another one of those wide-ranging tools. A Trojan is essentially a file that has been disguised as another file that you've downloaded to your network. The most famous Trojan right now is Emotet. TrickBot is another one. They often referred to as banking Trojans. You'll hear all sorts of different names when it comes to Trojans. Trojans are very unique in that they're really going to help your computer, help the bad guy get malicious software on your computer. So once you download a file, whatever it may be, inside that file might be another file, often Emotet. And what Emotet will do is it'll get on your network, start scanning around your computer and see what it can do. And depending on what it can do, it will install further Trojans, bringing in more and more software. And it's going to do this sneakily, hence the name Trojan. These ones are bad. Trojans are a number one delivery vector for ransomware. Another tool of a Trojan you'll often hear referred to as a RAT, remote access Trojan. And you can Google this, and there's all sorts of videos. But basically, what it lets someone do is full control over your computer. You've seen a lot of threats or scams where they talk about hopping on people's webcams. With a remote access Trojan, I can get on your webcam, open your disk drive, view your files, see what you're looking at, steal your passwords. Once you have a remote access Trojan on your network, on your device, they basically have your computer. As we go down the rest of these, I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. I'll kind of jump around here. Hack tools, crack tools, these are types of things that maybe they used a Trojan or another tool to install on your computer, tools that hackers would use to try to look for vulnerabilities elsewhere. A lot of these you'll see, especially in a larger network or a bigger group, a hack tool. If I got into a corporation, I might try to download a tool that's going to scan for potentially vulnerable devices that might be good targets for me to go after. So if you have those on your computer, the tool itself is probably not going to be the worst thing in the world. However, the fact that it's there means they've kind of got you elsewhere. Backdoor is another one. This is you hear this all the time. The NSA uses backdoors in devices. This means that in some way, shape, or form, they created a way on your computer that they can gain access whenever they want. You'll see a lot of these with tech support scams. TeamViewer is a tool that is used legitimately for people to help others on their computer. However, tools like TeamViewer can be set up that would allow me to access someone's computer whenever I want it, usually without permission, and that's not what you want. Hijackers, rogues, these are all things, again, tools and stuff like that. The last one is Worm. Worms are interesting. Actually, the United States government created the first ever worm device in a case called Stuxnet, where we went after the Iranian nuclear program and kind of introduced the world to cyber warfare. And they started there as, ending to nuclear events across the world. They have changed drastically. WannaCry, if anybody remembers, was the ransomware attack that hit the UK heavily, the US a few years back. That it used a worm. A worm means that it's going to use your computer to try to infect other computers through backdoors, through other methods. So you'll see those are decreasing quite a bit as we've seen kind of the tools and the tricks that allowed WannaCry to work are being patched. So you can see a lot of these are on the decline. Adware is up. Obviously, hack tools are up as we see more and more of those types of things. But those are just kind of probably more than, hopefully not, but maybe more than you care to know about the different types of malware. But this is what we see, across devices. Here's a fun one. I don't know if you've heard this rumor or not, but for years, people would say, well, I have a Mac. Doesn't matter to me. That is no longer true. The great Mac debate started when Macs first came out, and the saying was, we can't get viruses. We don't have viruses. That was true. The people who wrote viruses are trying to make money. When the majority of the world didn't have a Mac, it wasn't super profitable to write Mac-specific viruses. Well, that has changed. Microsoft is starting to lose market share, and Macs are up. If you have an iPhone, you have a Mac product, Mac desktop. So for the longest time, people thought they were invincible if you had a Mac. Well, in 2019, there was a 400% increase in Mac threats. Now, some of this came from the fact that some vulnerabilities started to be observed. Mac became a little more vocal in the vulnerabilities they saw, but the big driver was people have a lot of Mac devices. Apple devices were becoming more and more popular, so people started to code to them. So for the first time ever, Mac actually outpaced Apple or Windows in the amount of devices threats for device. When you look at this chart on the right here, what this is showing is saying, okay, this is coming from, again, Malwarebytes. So when a Malwarebytes was ran, now granted, you probably don't run it on a machine that's perfectly fine. So when it's run on an affected machine, roughly how many things are we detecting? Well, in 2018, Mac came in at about 4.8. In 2019, they came in at over 11 instances of malicious software. Now, fortunately for you Mac users, primarily this is falling into the adware category, but not all of them. Some of them are more malicious. So if you have an Apple device and you're thinking this antivirus stuff isn't for me, it might be time to start looking into that. Now, the second one on that list that we discussed is business email compromise. Now, what is business email compromise? This falls heavily under that kind of imposter theft that we saw on the FTC tracks earlier. This is somebody pretending to be somebody that they're not. The reason it's commonly referred to as business email compromise is you most likely see it in corporate environments. And as we see here, I'm going to kind of venture into the corporate world a little bit as I discuss this, but I'll try to keep it grounded kind of in consumer as well. There's some 4 famous cases of people who had it happen to them, but essentially what's happening is I'm going to email somebody and pretending to be either with a company or working with them or maybe HR, however it may be, and lie to you into getting you to do something that I want you to do. The primary attack vector for this, if you want to be profitable, is wires. So in the case of Barbara Corcoran, for anybody who's a fan of Shark Tank, there was an email from her assistant trying to wire funds to a vendor to the tune of $400,000, and that money went out. She hit the news pretty heavy on this because it's considered, kind of an embarrassing attack, but she's in very good company. Puerto Rico lost $4 million in 3 separate business email compromise attacks in January. That means in 1 month, they fell for 3 wire requests to different organizations, and each one proved to be fraudulent. Manor Independent School Districts, which is a school district chain in Texas, lost $2.3 million in a single attack. And Toyota, here's the big dollar amount, lost $37 million in August of 2019, paying a vendor incorrectly due to a business email compromise. Now, at the bank here, at the trust company here, we see these a lot. They do not always have to come from legitimate emails. A lot of times it's coming from clients, and they're trying to change the way they do business. They want to send money or move money differently than they have in the past. Now, sometimes it's coming from their actual email. Maybe they hacked into your email. Maybe they used a Trojan or a keylogger or what have you to get your password. Maybe they found your information in a data breach, signed in as you, and are now sending information to your institution saying, please process money for me this way. Now, if you're a customer of our banking side, we have a little bit of self-promotion here, but we have procedures in place to try to affect this. If you were to email us and say, hey, I send $100,000 or $10,000 or $100, a couple times a year to this address, but, that person changed it and all of a sudden I want it to go somewhere else, well, we're going to call you back. Now, as a consumer, what can you do? If you're getting instructions from someone, if you run a business, if you are seeing instructions or reasons to send money or make money or move money in any way, validate that. Email, and we'll go into that later, is dual factor. Put in a phone call, ask for more information, try to prove that it's them, because when people change the bank account you're trying to send funds to last minute, it's usually a bad sign. And sadly, the vast majority of these cases, this money goes unrefunded. Good news for Barbara Corcoran, she actually got her money back. Most of the other ones did not. And the reason for that is, in most cases, that money is going to go overseas right away. Internally, the IRS and the FBI chase these down. Their success rate is below 50%. Once it leaves the country, once that money's moved around, the odds are it's not coming back. So be extra careful with ACH file transfers, funds transfers from an email. Another one that we see a lot, and I have some examples for you, and these are very real examples, are requests like this. So if you're related with either the bank or the trust, you might recognize the 2 names at the top of these emails, Brett and Eric. Eric is the president of our trust company, and Brett is the CEO. These are big names inside the company. Well, I can tell you for certain that neither one of them owns either of these emails. Eric certainly is not going by President 2486896, and I asked and did verify. Brett is not going by realanonymama@gmail.com. How do you do that? Well, when you create an email, it lets you type in a name, and there is no validation of what you want that name to say. You can have it say anything. So with a quick look, someone must have gone on our website, saw a news article, figured out who the CEOs and sent these messages. Now, you might not know these two other people, Larry and Josie. They are and were employees in the bank. So they get these requests. Well, I don't have copies of them here, but you can say you reply. Say someone replies to this, are you free now? Are you now? A common thing that happens here is it comes from a position of power and asks you to do something. Now, weirdly enough, they ask to buy gift cards. We see this all the time. In this case with Josie too, they're looking to get your cell. They don't want to be talking over business lines of communication. As a consumer, they're going to ask you for other kinds of stuff. They might ask for a cell number so they can talk to you on the phone or text you. They want to change the way in which they're communicating. If they say I hacked an email and I'm sending emails as that user, I want to get as few communications via the secure channel as possible and move to another vector. So that's another very big sign when they're going to try to ask you, how else can I talk to you? Or I might be emailing you from this, but expect an email quickly from my personal email, or text me at this number. These are all ways to disrupt the communication chain and break that up. So in this case, they're asking, are you free now? And what we've gotten, or what you'll get if you do respond, very famously, is a request for gift cards. There was an incident a few years back of a woman who was working as a receptionist, and the reply came in. She gave him the cell phone number. This was not Integrity. This was a separate organization, but gave him the cell phone number and said, hey, I'm at a conference. You can't get a hold of me. That's why I can't talk on the phone. I'm texting. Go buy $1,000 worth of Amazon cards and read me the codes. I'm trying to give them away at this conference as a gift, and I'm going to just give people the codes. So she did. She expensed it to the company, and she was asked to pay it back and actually lost her job. So these types of things are very sad and very, very common. A lot of times as a consumer, what you're going to see more so is that these are going to be coming from you. Someone gets in your email and they're going to start emailing your relationships trying to get you to do things. So it is important to build that kind of relationship with the institutions through which you transfer money. If you're sending large dollar wires and they're going to call you to validate, it doesn't have to be Integrity, any institution you work with to do this. You want to make sure that they know, just because it says it's from you, if it looks like it's from you, or if it is from your email, be very cautious for those types of things. Maybe put on your files that you don't want to allow email to be the only point of contact that you're going to move large dollar amounts. These are all things to consider. And as we go through here in a second, getting access to someone's email is no longer all that hard. It is very cheap and very easy to do, sadly. So people who solely rely on that that's not the best way to do it. And they don't even have to do this. As the case with all of these, I can make an email really quickly, or whoever. Again, I keep saying just to clarify, I'm not the one doing these. We got these, they weren't from me. But it's not hard to do. So it is definitely something to consider, especially how prevalent this is. Business email compromise, again, imposter emails, email imposter syndrome, however you want to refer to it. This is rapidly growing, and COVID is no exception. COVID is seeing these types of scams go through the roof, with people saying, hey, I'm out with COVID, or I can't come into the branch, or I can't get on the phone because I'm under COVID. Could you do this for me? So as things get more and more digital, rely on those other opportunities, build that reputation. In these cases, Josie knows Brett. Josie knows Brett's not going to talk to her that way or ask for that stuff. That's a weird request. And she'll call him and ask. And with customers, as we see them with customers too, maybe it's something you have a good relationship with someone in the front line. They get a weird request. They're going to call you and chat and ask you about it. That's the kind of behavior, you should be encouraging across the board, and be very mindful. You might think, hey, if they got into my email, I can go into my sent and see it. They're usually cleverer than that. These first few emails, what they're going to do is they're going to create email rules that anything coming in referencing this email chain is going to automatically forward to their real email and delete. And that's when they're going to say, hey, I'm going to email you from a different address. So another thing here, I'm just kind of defining the scope, and you can attest how realistic of an issue that is for you. But if you're moving money around, especially if you interact with wires, wire fraud is the number one dollar value for business email compromise. The next one, and one of the biggest that sadly you can do the least about, is data breaches. Again, we're going to be using old numbers because the stats aren't all in for 2020 here. But when we look at 2019, there was a 33% increase in data breaches over 2018. Over 7.9 billion data records were exposed in 2019. Now, if you remember, that's more than there are people in the world. So there's a lot of repeat customers, but overall, we're looking at tons of individual data records being breached. And now here comes the scary part. Quarter one of 2020, 273% increase of records when compared to 2019. There are billions and billions of records out already in 2020. In quarter one alone, we were close to 8 billion records. The Wall Street Journal says, expect at this time all of your data has been stolen is available on the dark web. Digital Shadows, which is a company, again, that does kind of these tests and statistics, they estimate that 15 billion sets of credentials are now readily available online. So that's saying, and excuse my poor math, but just under 2 records per person in the world are online. And they're calling that 615 billion as individual records. So accounts for specific things or specific accounts, not saying that if your Netflix account was breached 12 times, that's 12. No, they're saying that's 1. So that lends a whole lot of credence to the Wall Street Journal. And now, sadly, as a consumer, when we look at data breaches, you can't stop them. You can put your trust into organizations, and as we've seen, some of the largest organizations in the world have had these breaches. So you can say who you do business with, but that might not even help you. When we look at institutions like Equifax, I don't know a single person who has ever gone to Equifax and says, yeah, take my credit card or credit rates and do all this for me. You don't really have a choice. They get it whether you like it or not. And the data they're getting is your credit report, some of the most sensitive data that we have. So what can we look at and think about? Well, let's look at what your data is worth. So here is from an article. Every year, this organization goes out, Keeper Security goes out and scans the dark web, and they look at, what the value is. Now, when we look at these top ones, sadly, Spotify, about a quarter, you can buy a Spotify account. Hulu, $8. Netflix, $8. PayPal is a lot, $247. And the reason for that is it's usually linked directly to a bank account and very easy to pull money with very, very little connection. Here's one that I do like to see, and this is, well, not like to see, let me rephrase that, but here's one that, I like to point out, Social Security, and it's actually down. If you attended last year, you talked to me last year, I would always say, and if people were talking to me, your Social Security was about $3, $3 to $5. Well, not anymore. We have Equifax, so thanks for that. As we see with Equifax and other large breaches, when you're losing 245 million records at a time, the value of a social starts to go down when everybody's social is freely available. And the amount of stuff you can do with social is starting to slowly go down, which is good because we can't change those. Driver's license, this would be the data on your driver's license. That's worth about $20. Credit card is $50. Passports are $62, and medical records are $60. I would like to put an asterisk here next to credit card, and that is interesting and relevant, and hopefully is relevant to you here. That number is a range. In studying this, I've looked through a lot. I've seen, attended dark web seminars. We've searched the dark web. That number varies, and funnily enough, it varies based on your credit score. So if you have high lines of credit and a good credit score, your credit card's worth more. I've seen ranges. This says 50. I've seen the range go from about $10 to $20 to 60, 65 plus, depending on the person's credit. So you can assign yourself where you see fit, but just know none of these are a huge dollar amount. At the end of the day, $50 for an access to someone's full credit limit is not much. And that just is a testament to how much of this stuff is readily available. Netflix, Hulu, yeah, you can kind of expect those. When I first saw it, I was thinking, well, compared to $15 a month, well, that's not $8 a month, that's $8 total. These are the types of things that, these are the areas that people are going after. I read an article that says, if you're doing cybercrime, why pay for Netflix? So those are all the kinds of things, that's where your value lies. Medical records is a big one, and medical records is growing in value. I read an article that stated, upwards of $1,000 for your full medical record. And the reason being is that is very helpful data for blackmail, for other types of stuff. They're getting more data from that than the actual data itself. So things to think about. And then let's identity theft. What's identity theft worth? Now you'll see on the other page, I said driver's license is $20, and I did kind of stipulate that was for the data. This is, and the site that gave me this is Privacy Affairs Dark Web Price Index. What they're pulling is, this is what it costs to actually get the document. So if I buy your data for your driver's license, $20, I go in here and for just another $70, I put in my picture and everything else is going to match yours. Average quality, those tend to be the kind that, you're not getting too far with. High quality, They've done studies. Some of those are indistinguishable by people who should be able to distinguish them. These are the kind that are going to get you past pretty high level things. So $550 may seem like a lot, but that person has stolen your identity to a very high level. Auto insurance cards, AAA cards, bank statements, bank statements with transactions, again, those are valuable. A lot of times when you call into stuff like that, Wells Fargo is getting picked on here. I don't know exactly why they just picked Wells Fargo, but it is more universal than that. A lot of people are going to ask you to validate your bank based on some of the last transactions you did. So having access to a statement of transactions gets you going pretty easily. A Rutgers State University ID, $70. Here's the kicker. This one's pretty interesting. A U.S. passport. Now, this would be someone buying a U.S. passport in your name with your social as you, $1,500. That is not as high as I would have expected, quite frankly, in the past or before I've been digging into this. These are lower than you'd think. So when we look at identity theft and dark web value and data, this is the dollar amount. And this is relevant because those data breaches we've been talking about and we're about to talk about again, this is where they're getting that data. And we'll bring one up here. This is just a nice tool. I like to use it because it kind of, is eye-catching, but rather than breaking down the data breaches, this is data breaches visualized. So when we say, hey, for $1,500, I can become you. Well, what does it take to do that? Well, I need your social security number. Well, we've learned that's about $1. I'm going to need driver's license information, proof of birth, stuff like that. And it is not playing along with me nicely here. Apologize for that. Let's give this another try. If we can't get it, you'll just have to take my word for it. The amount of data breaches are flooding the system. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on this too much. But if it were to load here, or it does load, you'll see some of the large-scale breaches and just the sheer number of them and the data that's out there. So essentially, the point I'm trying to prove here is an there we go. An attacker can benefit from being you to large financial gain for low financial input, thanks to organizations within whom you put your trust. Facebook lost passwords and password data to the tune of 420 million. But some of these, Microsoft is a huge one. The record holder still to this day, Yahoo, with their 3 billion email addresses that were lost back in, I think now it's 2008, 2010. It doesn't even show up on this list anymore. It's so old. But, these companies that you trust or you allow to do that lose your data. And that data is very valuable to criminals for a very low dollar amount. So that's kind of when I'm talking the risk of a data breach, that's the big risk to you. And yes, it also risks that someone is going to horribly, horribly mess up your Netflix recommendations. So you want to be careful there as well. So a good thing you can check, and a fun just tool here, if you want to say, hey, has this ever happened to me? This is a tool, haveibeenpwned.com. We'll see here. It looks like it's going to also decide to make me look bad here. But what this is a site that's run by a guy who is very passionate about data breaches. He has tried to do this for a very long time, and this site's been around. So what he does is he takes all the data on that page we just saw and tries to compile it. So he's got a number that's big enough that I'm not even sure, 10 billion records here, with various accounts that he tracks. Now, if we look at the 15 billion, he doesn't have them all, but he's got quite a few. So if we want to put in an address here, an email address, and this is my personal email address, so please be polite with that. But if we scan it, and this is a valid test, I obviously have done this. Oh no, we see that I have been involved with that address in 2 specific areas, and that was Ticketfly and 8Tracks. So at some point, both of these institutions lost stuff, including my passwords. And this is always very valuable here, is looking at what's compromised, because as we learned on the last few slides, some data is more valuable than others. So thankfully, to Ticketfly, not a whole lot that thing hurt me. 8Tracks, not so great. But you can put your address in here. I've seen, some people come back clean, and that's great. I've seen some with 10, 15, 20. Feel free to put yours in there. Again, that's haveibeenpwned.com. They do have a password search tool as well. We'll get in here in a minute, but really what they do is a very good job of letting you know. You can also sign up where they'll email you if your email comes up in one of the breaches they scan. A pretty helpful tool that I would recommend. So those are really kind of the areas, as we discussed, the most common areas that you should, in my opinion, really worry about on the cyber landscape there. And so this is where we get into the category that I like. This is where you have to start to accept those risks. So you have choices, as we discussed before. You can avoid them, go full caveman, live in the woods. You can transfer them. You can ask other people to do it for you, trust other people to monitor it for you. If you have a family member in IT, we get emails all the time to ask for help. That's great. But again, you can't get rid of the responsibility. That will always be on you. So what, like I said, I recommend before is mitigating. So let's just go through some tactics and how do we mitigate these attacks? And fortunately, all of these issues that come up can really be mitigated with some of the same techniques. So number one area that all these attacks are going to come through is email. And fortunately, this is an easy one. We can really mitigate risk in email quite successfully. Every year, Verizon, the company that sells you your cell phones, also puts out a really fascinating report. Now, I guess fascinating is speculative. I find it fascinating. You may or may not, but it is interesting. It's free online if you want to read it. It's called the Data Breach Investigations Report. This report is fantastic. What they do is they go through data breaches of all the large organizations they work with and don't, and look at deep dives into what happened. How did they get breached? How did the data get lost? Where did it come from? How long did it take? All sorts of fun statistics. Well, the number one statistic I'm using here, the one I like the most, is of all the breaches that Verizon got their hands on in 2019, again, so this is the 2020 report, so we're looking at 2019 data, 96% of them started with an email. Now, why is that? Well, it's quite simple. Everybody has it. It's an easy way to get in. In modern days, we talk about here in a little bit with antivirus, or if you're a business or more tech-savvy, firewall, makes it really hard. It is really hard for me to find your computer online, get into your computer and do malicious activities. But I can send you an email, and if in that email I can get you to do something I want you to do, either give me your password or download software, I don't have to worry about the rest. And they find it's really successful. So this is 96% of attacks. That means of all the breaches, 96% of them started with an email. That means they were successful. Now, that doesn't mean all those, every malicious email is activated, but boy, your success ratio is really good, and the cost of it is really low. Anybody can type an email and send it for free. So let's look at it. As a consumer, there's going to be two things really that people are going for in an email from you. They're either going to want something from you or want you to do something. And you can very easily break it down into that category. So if I want something from you, this is an example of that type of an email. So again, you can see I'm using myself as an example. This is an email coming from, Apple updates. And as we'll go through here on the left hand, I'll go kind of in order here as I start to venture off and get excited. Step one, always be critical of emails. Even if as we talked about with email compromise, it could be coming from your best friend, someone you email all the time. It could even have a chain of emails below it. In a hacked email case, we've had it here. What you do is you'll see, okay, he was talking about this. I'm going to just pick up in the middle of the conversation and ask him to do something. So no email is safe. Let's put it that way. If you start from the mindset that every email is bad, it'll help. So first things first, do you recognize the sender? Let's look at the sender here. So this is coming from the support.app.le-updates.com. That is not apple.com. Domains are very cheap. A lot of big organizations like Apple, they'll try to buy variations of Apple and help you out, but there's always going to be one. They don't own apple-updates.com. And I can tell you, as we do it here, it costs $6 a month to host a domain. So I could host Kevin Hall. Well, I'm sure someone stole it, but if they hadn't, if I was the only Kevin Hall, I could have kevinhall.com, and it would cost me about $6. So for the cost of $6, I can spin up something that looks like Apple. Then I can find an Apple email, steal the pictures, and send it to you. So email signatures, it's very, very important, and we'll get into this in a spoofing set a little bit more, but it's always important to look at the sender. Do you recognize them? Secondly, what are they telling you to do? Do they want me to do something? Do they want me to download something, give data? Here they're saying, hey, someone changed your date of birth. Kind of weird request. That doesn't change very often, but someone messed with it. So do you want to go fix it? Yeah, well, I would click on that link, and I'm going to go somewhere that's not Apple, and it's going to say, hey, sign into Apple, I just gave them my credentials to Apple. And as we know, accounts are valuable. I put in here, is there an ultimatum? These are all things where they're going to try to scare you into doing stuff. Alternate solutions, I like that one as another kind of giveaway. A lot of times what you'll see is if it's a real email, if it's really coming from Apple, they might say, click here to do it, or you can go here, or access your account and do these steps. Now, an attacker is never going to give you an alternate solution. They don't want you to do it differently. They're not going to say, go to apple.com and do it yourself. Because if you do that, you're not doing them any favors at all. Are there links in the email? And when we look at links, see if mine still works here. It does. Links are malicious. You can make a link say anything you want. So in this email on the left, you'll see it says Apple support. Well, if we look at it on the right, links can go all over the place. So hover over that and make sure you're not following it. A lot of modern ones are starting to say, hey, click this link. If you don't like links, go here, and it'll put it in plain text. And lastly, have you seen an email like this before? I can tell you in this example I got on the left, I have never in my life changed my birthday. It's been the same since I was born, and I'm assuming it'll stay that way till I die. Someone going into my account and changing my birthday is pretty odd, unless you're trying to go on restaurants, in which case I recommend mixing them throughout the year, kind of get them spread out. Whole different story. That isn't the case here. I didn't do that at Apple. So let's look at an example. This is a real life example, and I love this example. This is a tool we use. This did not come from Integrity, but it came to us. This is an example from Zix Corp. So what Zix is, if you're not familiar, if you haven't worked with us or you haven't seen it, and quite frankly, if you don't have a relationship with us, you might not have seen it. Zix is an email encryption tool. It keeps your data safe. They say look at emails like a postcard. Well, Zix closes that postcard up and puts it in a nice envelope for us. Well, when you receive a Zix email, which in this case it came from Redacted, it looks something like this. And it says, hey, open the message. Click there to open it. If you don't like clicking it, you'll notice they give you another link to click on. Well, here's that example spread out. Now, the top one, I sent this to myself from Integrity Bank and Trust. This is real. It says open message, that's all the same. Well, look at this. And look at this. This is a spot on copy. They took the code straight from this and copied it. So when we look at our other one, what we can expect to see is, in the case of this, and again, I'm redacting it for the sake of the person who we received this from, that email isn't someone we work with very often, and they don't, to my knowledge, use Zix. When you hover over that open message, it was taking you to groupfile.809m.com, when in reality, it should be going to web1.zixmail.com. Now, if you've gotten these emails in the past, you would know, hey, that doesn't look quite right. So that's where that repetition comes from, things that are out of the norm, out of behavior. The best, bar none, best way to solve this is say you got this email on the top and say it was from us 100% legitimately. The best thing you can do is call if you weren't expecting it, say, hey, I got this. Can you confirm that? Now, in this case on the bottom, we did call that company and they said, no, we're not sending anything and we don't use Zix. Turns out they had a bigger problem. So say we did. Say we went through with it. We clicked on open our message. This is, sorry, and I forgot my groupfile890.com. This is what groupfile890.com looks like. It is no longer up. It's down. We reported it. But at the time, well, that's odd. You know, I thought I was going to Zix and now I'm signing into Office. Well, again, they're trying to steal your account. And as more and more companies move remote, Office 365 credentials, although not on that list, I can tell you, for a company are very valuable. Worth a lot more than a Spotify account. Beats the heck out of Netflix. So this right here, and you can see in the back, we didn't get any further, but you can see CL payment, it's a fake file, and usually those files contain data that is going to also hack your computer. So these guys are getting you two ways. They're getting your credentials, and then they're going to get you to download something for them. So not what we want to do. So here's where we talk about link manipulation, and this is what I talked about briefly before, and I didn't want to touch on it too much because I knew we were coming here. When we look at that apple.com, here's an example. And prior to my time here, and when I was in college for a while, I worked for Verizon and doing kind of a similar role. And I can tell you for experience, boy, the bigger the organization, the more you will see this. And in my time at Verizon, I saw all three of these frequently. Misspellings. So I'm going to take a character that looks like a character, an O instead of an A, you know, a 1 instead of an I, whatever it may be, or 1 instead of a lowercase L is a better example, but whatever it may be, and I'm going to spell it not quite right. The second one, I'm going to lead you somewhere else. So I can put dot whatever, dot, and then the last thing before the .com is where you're going. So in this case, you're going to mybank.scamsite.com, not mybank.com. And finally, my personal favorite, because of how often we used to see it, mybank23.com. You see this one a lot, especially with coupon fraud. When I worked for Verizon, you'd see it all the time, and they would say, I went to Verizon50.com because that's 50% off deal you were going with. Not to knock any particular company, but I think it's safe to say across all cell phone companies, they're not running 50% off deals. They are not known for awesome savings and deals, and especially ones that just come to you in an email unrelated. What happens when you go to those types of sites is it's almost always an exact copy of the real one. Or in this case, the email is going to look exactly like what a Verizon email would look like because you can just copy and paste that code. But in this case, all three of these, none of these are real. Anything other than exactly what you're expecting to see is generally a big red flag. Now, sometimes companies will use mailers, mailing tools, stuff like that, so it might look a little different. But boy, if they're asking you to do something you're uncomfortable with, and this looks anything other than mybank.com, plain as day, that's a huge red flag. Now, this is one, and I put it in last year, and I'm putting it in again because it's always good to admit when you're wrong. When I first started giving these talks, here's what I would always tell people. Well, if you clicked on a link in an email and it said HTTPS in the front, good sign that you're in the right place. Well, that's not entirely true anymore. To get into that, let's look at what HTTPS is. It stands for secure, HTTP secure. It's often referred to as TLS, Transport Layer Security, or SSL, Secure Socket Layer. Acronyms you don't really need to know. What it means is your connection between you and that site is secure. It is encrypting what you enter to when it receives it. So if anybody's listening in the middle, snooping, whatever it may be, they're not seeing what you're typing. Now, certificates used to be relatively expensive. You had to pay money. You had to get registered. You had to go through a licensed domain registrar and say, hey, I am who I say I am. Give me this certificate and let me be encrypted. Well, that's changing. In an attempt to make the internet more secure, good thing, companies like Google's and others are starting to make it really easy to get an SSL certificate on your site. There are sites called OpenSSL or SSL Everywhere that are giving them away for next to nothing, some of them even free. And the reason is they want that data traffic to be secure. They don't want people typing in credentials or card information on a non-secured site. Well, the problem is it's a heck of a lot easier to do it for your phishing site as well. So mybank23.com, I used to have to get it registered, and most registrars are going to look at that and say, no chance, buddy, you're not you. Well, nowadays, where it's all getting automated and easy, mybank23 is really easy to get a certificate. And so what we're seeing is in the past few years, the rate of which SSL certs are on malicious websites has gone up. So now 77% of sites you go to, malicious or otherwise in phishing emails, are going to have a certificate. Now, I started giving this speech in 2016, roughly. It's changed since then, I promise. But you can see where it was then, about 4%. Pretty rare. That was a good indicator that you were where you wanted to be. So going forward, don't get me wrong, HTTPS is great. If you're on a shopping site and you're putting in a card number and you look at the top and it doesn't have that little padlock, bad news. Don't do that. But if you're using this padlock as the we're good to go methodology of I'm browsing the web and I'm where I'm supposed to be, that's a problem. So let's take a look at what to do if you fell for a phish. So say you saw your Zix email or MyBank, or boy, you just couldn't resist the chance of getting 50% off Verizon, which if I thought it was real, I could tell you I'd give it a shot, but you did it. Okay, what do? Change your passwords as soon as possible. As we talked about with those data breaches, we talked about with everything else, most likely what you did in a phish these days is you gave them your username and password. Well, change it. Another thing we've seen, and this happened to my mother, so I will lovingly bring it up and talk at her demise. Hopefully everybody else learn. So all of a sudden, is your email getting spammed like crazy? It's a thing, and it's very interesting. It's called email bomb or email blast. What people will do when they hack your account, so say you went in, signed into Citibank, wasn't really Citibank, and now they're going to go crazy on your account. They know you're going to get alert emails. So they will sign you up for every newsletter under the sun. I think in the case of my mom, when I was working on her computer with her trying to fix this, she had thousands of emails a minute. There was at the time, I think at the time I was looking at it, there's close to 30,000 unread emails. And this is for every newsletter you've ever heard of. Now, no one wants to do this, but if that's the case and that's what you're getting, you can unsubscribe. You can use tools to mass unsubscribe. At that stage, it might be best looking to changing your email. If you really, really can't, look out there. There are tools. We use them to kind of unsubscribe from all these, but it doesn't always work. Secondly, watch your cards. A lot of people reuse passwords and accounts, which I don't recommend you do. But if you do, and I got your access to, say, your Netflix, there's a decent chance you signed up for your credit card with the same username and password. I'm going to start buying stuff. And the first thing I do if I go in there is I'm going to change your email so you don't get the alerts. So watch your card statements. If you know you entered card information, say the site you signed into was Citibank, call your card company, get your card reset, let them know. And lastly, if you want to be 1/7 of the people who do this, which I recommend you do, be on the good side, report it to the FTC, sorry. I'm getting my government regulations mixed up, but the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, they monitor this and they provide those reports. Also, the side note here, if you are interested in these types of things, they also do a good newsletter for consumer theft. I've used their statistics through this and I have more coming up here. FTC is an absolutely great resource for this kind of stuff. So by all means, go in there and report it. They will also give you tools and tricks on how to help get around it. So, but it is not the end of the world. People get phished all the time, but think critically, mitigate that risk, watch out, be mindful, and then act quickly. That's the other thing you can do. So you can't avoid it. You can't get rid of the risk of phishing attacks, but do these things and you'll be in better shape. If it did happen to you, go through here. I strongly encourage it. Next, passwords. So all these risks to you, data breach, malware, all these things, a huge mitigating factor is having secure passwords. So when we look at passwords, length is better than complexity. That's the old saying, the longer the better. It's starting to, as with all things, change. When NIST came out, NIST is the National Institute for Cyber Technology or Systems Technology. I'm going to botch the acronym and it's recorded. So if you're out there and you work with NIST, I apologize. But NIST, they write the password guidance. And it used to be change your password every 30 days. Never write your password down. It is vital that you keep these things moving. Well, what they found out is that's not how passwords work. We're not creative like that, or maybe some of you are, but I know I'm not. It's tough to come up with a password every 30 days. And it's tough to come up with a good one. I can do password 1, password 2, password 3 till the end of time. But that's what NIST found too, is people would just take their password, add a number to the end, and increase that number each time. Not a good idea, especially if your password comes up in a breach and I see that there's a number at the end. I'm going to just try the next number. It's pretty common and it's working. So here's kind of the guidance, and we'll go over here in a second why. So length beats complexity. I think it puts you in an echelon of people that don't tend to use long ones. Avoid common words. There's a thing called dictionary attacks. You don't want your password to be, tiger or whatever it may be, snorkel, whatever random word I could come up with next. Avoid just simple, straight dictionary words. Never, ever reuse the breach password. Now, the saying goes, don't reuse any password, but let's be realistic. You sign up for a lot of things, maybe the newsletter of the month. I don't really care about that account. I'll use a password. I know it's okay. I'll reuse it. Fine. If that password has ever come up in a breach, you went into that have I been pwned, or you go or you hear, or the company tells you it was breached in the case of Target, that password should be dead to you. And the reason why is they store those and they will always try them. So once that password's out there, it's no good. Use things around you for inspiration. This is coming from a lot of guidance. So right now I'm sitting in a training room and I've got a water bottle and a notepad and some headphones. Maybe I can build something off of that. Water, headphone, notepad, put some hyphens in there and then asterisks, and I've got a pretty good password. Lastly, and we kind of touched on this, get creative. So why is all these things important? Well, let's take a look. So again, I'm sorry, my stats are a year old, but what are the most common passwords in 2019? Boy, none of them are good. What can we take from this? Simple characters, simple words. QWERTY, for those of you who don't know, next time look down at your keyboard. That's just the top bar of your keyboard. Third from the bottom on the last column, QWERTY, that's all the way across the top. I highlighted one here, or asterisk it, which is G-checkout. So this article is presented by NordPass. They did an article each year, and they do the top passwords, and you kind of watch as they kind of come up and go down. That one threw me. I couldn't figure that out. A, not a terrible password. And B, it was used over 300,000 times. So why was that? Well, no one really knows, but I found some people smarter than me, and I was reading some theories, and the guess is it's a Czech, as in Czechoslovakian program company. That's the default password. And here's why this is important. Here's why I wanted to take a second to bring this up. Default passwords are terrible. Anytime you buy a product and it says, oh, here's our password, or it sets you up with one and doesn't make you change it, change it. The estimate of what happened here is this was the default password for whatever organization this may be. And it's probably one of those where you sign in and they never ask you to sign in again. Well, they got breached. Over 300,000 of the users had the same darn password. You don't want to do that. So if you ever buy something, buy a camera, buy a webcam, buy any internet device, and it says, no, don't worry about it, our password's built in, that means the password's hard-coded. And I can tell you what, that means I can Google it and look up the password. So I don't believe for one second that that was a password that was really being used. I tend to agree with the logic that that was a default, but I left it on here because I wanted to point out, don't use default passwords. And another one, not as crazy, but you see Dubsmash on there. Now, if you remember back, and it reloaded, so I don't blame you if you don't, on our list of all the big bubbles of passwords that have been breached, one of the organizations that had massively been breached was an organization called Dubsmash.com. I bet that was a default password for them as well. So the moral of the story is, don't use common passwords. If you see your password on this list, I beg of you after this, go change it. And if you get a default, make sure you change it. Now, kind of go a little quickly through here as we're kind of starting to run out of time, but here's how passwords work. When you type a password into a computer, it creates this thing called a hash. And, you know, all hashes, if they're run through the same algorithm, are the same length of characters. So what you type in on the left, the system sees what's on the right. You can't go from right to left. You can only go from left to right. That's how the equation works. That's why they're uncrackable. That's when we talk about encryption. So we look at the top two. These are awful. Those hashes are stored all over the place. So if I pull your password or get a breach and I see hash passwords and I see 8D9, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I know your password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, say we make a good password. What percentage of webinar hosts are wearing pants? That's a pretty solid password. And a number I don't know that I want to know the answer to. Hash looks the same, but I can pretty much guarantee you that hash is not going to show up in any breaches. So when we look at the next page here, now, say I want to crack that password, and the best way to crack passwords is to already know the answer. It's like anything. I'll do really great on a test if I know the answers ahead of time. Got me this far, and this is how they do it when they hack passwords too. So if I'm trying to hack your password and I get the hash, which is what I can pull out of the database, when a data company breaches data, normally they're breaching that hash password. I'll compare it to my list of, as we saw before, 15 billion known hashes, and if it shows up on that list, I know your password. So to hack a password and using a cracking tool, I can hack 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or password in less than 1 second. Now, if my password's not on that list and I can't compare my hash from what we saw on the right side to the left side, I have to hack it the old-fashioned way. I have to guess characters or try to recreate it in some way. That takes time. Now, I'm not really good at math, and e to the 65th, I'm not even going to try to do, but we're talking millions and millions and billions of years to crack what password a webinar hosts are wearing pants as a password. Now, you don't have to do that as your password, but throw a few words in there, throw some hyphens. You'll see that password as a space bar. A lot of institutions will allow the space bar, and space bar is conveniently one of the least commonly used password characters. Anything you can use to differentiate it. You have a made-up word that your family uses, something that's not real, but you call it that, the weird thing you call your dog or whatever it may be. We all have that weird nickname. Those make great parts of passwords. Now, not the whole password, add some more stuff to it, but use things that other people haven't used. And I had someone tell me once, oh, I put all my passwords in Spanish. I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, that's not true. Spain has hackers too. So different languages are still real words, but mix it up, put some underscores, some hashes, some hyphens, some symbols in there, make it nice and long, and you're looking at a password that's not going to be easily cracked. Lastly, the best thing to do with passwords, and I highly recommend this, get a password manager. How these work is when you sign in somewhere, it's going to suggest a password for you. And it'll suggest 30 characters of nonsense. And it's great because you don't ever have to remember it. The password manager will store all your passwords behind your master password. Now, that master password better be really good. And since you're only going to ever have to remember one ever again, make it a good one. But everything else is going to remember for you. So when you sign into your email or whatever you're signing into, it's going to say, hey, do you want me to suggest a password for this? You say yes, it throws up 15 characters of garbled nonsense. You're good to go. And you don't have to remember that garbled nonsense, because the next time you go to sign in, LastPass, Dashlane, whatever it may be, is going to say, oh, I know this one, and plug it in for you. It actually expedites sign-in. Again, I'm trying really hard here, and I don't want to recommend one product over another. So here's the list. This list comes from a review site that aggregates passwords. So any on this list, probably pretty good. Personally, I use LastPass at home in my personal life. They have a phone app, browser extensions. If you ask me what any of my passwords were, odds are I know maybe a couple. I have no clue. It says, do you like this password? I don't even look at it. I say, yep. And then the next time I sign in, I'm good to go. The perk is, now say Google gets breached and my Gmail password is out there. Well, I don't care. That password is just garbled nonsense. I'll go into LastPass and say, okay, pick me another round of nonsense, stick it in there, I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about changing all my passwords. I never reused it. And I don't have to worry about the person seeing it and finding out that I put, webhost 1, and he can guess I'm probably at webhost 3 now, and he gets it and is good to go. So strongly recommend password managers. Do some diligence of your own. Almost all of these are free or offer free solutions. They also offer paid solutions which give you all sorts of features. And that is kind of one of those things. The paid version might be worth it to you. Assess your risk and decide. Is it worth it to pay for more features? I can't say it's a bad idea, but it really depends on your situation. Lastly, what used to be the end-all be-all of passwords, dual-factor authentication. I can't stress this enough. This is great. You will see now well, let me start first. What dual-factor is, for those of you who don't know, this is a second password. It's a second wall, second layer of defense. When I go to sign in to my Gmail account, it sends me a code to one of these apps. I use Duo. And LastPass and Google, I kind of have them all. I like to play with these, but it sends me a code. So I type in my username, I type in my password, and it sends me a code. I enter what the code is, or I hit OK, and I sign in. So now if I'm the hacker, the malicious activist, and I got your stuff in a breach, it doesn't do me any good. I still have to get this code from you. Now, it's not 100%. They used to say 99% was the efficacy rate of dual factor. That rate is going down as hackers get more and more attuned to it. They're finding other ways, but it is a great tool to use. And there's this site here, twofactorauth.org. And on twofactorauth, sorry, I have a header, it's in the way here. This is a tool that'll tell you what sites out there use dual factor. And if they don't, let me complain to them. So social, well, you don't need to dive into it too far here. But anyway, what it is, it's a big list. So here, betting. So BetVictor does, CloudBet does, WinToday does not. I can go on Twitter and tell them to do it. If you have an Integrity Bank and Trust account, we do offer dual factor authentication. However, the catch is you have to ask us to turn it on for you. So if you have one, I strongly recommend you sign in. And if you want to, if we have your information, throw it in the chat. I will do it for you personally. I will turn it on. We use the app Duo or SMS. Now, when you're choosing dual factor, just know if you have the opportunity to use an app, that is considered the most secure way. Dual factor to a cell phone sends you a code to your phone. It is the easiest way to crack dual factor. Now, again, it's a huge barrier to entry. It's harder to do, but it is easier than some of these other ones. So if you have the option, use the app. If not, SMS is still leaps and bounds above not having it at all. If you don't have it on any accounts, I would recommend it. This is a kind of one of those mitigating risk factors, though. Choose the accounts you want it on. Hey, if you sign up for a recipe website, I don't really care enough to put dual factor on. Even if they offer it, I might not turn it on. But if I move money around on that account, personally, I would recommend it. Actually, I recently had this talk with my wife, and she got it turned on unwittingly, I could say. Because it's for a bank account. Take those things, look at the accounts that you need to secure. I'm not going to sit here and tell you every account should have a 20-character password and Duo, but pick and choose. Pick those accounts that you're concerned with, mitigate that risk, and accept it elsewhere. But if the feature is available, by all means, I strongly recommend you use it. Just for your records across the top, these images, Google Authenticator, LastPass Authenticator, Duo, and Microsoft Authenticator. There are plenty more. Stick to the more name brand ones if you can. All right. I'm going to try to kind of speed up here. I apologize. There's no one here to ask questions or guide me. I just tend to ramble on. So I'm going to tackle antivirus here. So what is antivirus? Antivirus is a feature, a tool you can install on your computer. What antivirus does is similar to how passwords work. It's going to look at the hash of the file. It's going to run your file through an algorithm, spit out a piece of data, and then check it against the list. It's essentially a glorified bouncer. So when we look at an antivirus, say we're looking for a malicious file. Now I ran this presentation through a hashing algorithm, and I got this hash you see on the top. The antivirus is going to take a look at that file, run it through its list of known bad programs, and say, nah, this one's fine, and let it go. Now the bottom one, this is the hash file, and this is real. This is the hash for WannaCry. Now WannaCry, one of the worst ransomware infections of all time, that's bad. So it's going to flag every list your antivirus has and say, oh, nope, don't let that one in. It's not on my list. Can't let it through. VirusTotal here, and I'm going to try it. We'll see if it lets me do it. I want to go quick, but this is good. So there's all these sites out there in addition to antivirus. So you can use these things, and it'll show you exactly how it works. No. Okay. I apologize, but in the sake of time, I'm going to skip the VirusTotal solution here, but I highly recommend it. If you get something, VirusTotal is a tool. It's a free tool made by security geeks. And what it does is it lets you upload any file you want and check it. So say your antivirus says it's good, but you don't know. Paste the file into file or VirusTotal or a similar website. There's a ton out there, and it'll scan it against 80 antiviruses. Sometimes one will have a different list than the other. But always think of your antivirus, as that bouncer, but any bouncer is only good as the list he's got. So always make sure you're using a good antivirus and always make sure it's up to date. Here's a list. Again, I'm not giving my personal opinion here. If I was, I'm currently using Bitdefender, but that is neither here nor there. This is a list by a reputable source, Tom's Guide. Tom's Guide is a website. It's not some guy I just asked. Tom's Guide rated the top 20 free antiviruses 2020. This is the same list, and I can tell you the only thing that changed, Windows Defender bumped up one. So this has been the same list for the last 3 years. These are the ones to go for. Windows Defender, I put the asterisk there. It's built into a Windows machine. If you buy a Windows computer, it is on by default. You are using it. You can go into the settings at any time and look at how it's doing, check the scans. It's stripped down. There's very few features, but it is doing the bare minimum antivirus for you. So that is always good. Kaspersky, if you're into that sort of thing, is a Russian program. So a lot of corporations are tending not to use it at a personal level. I have to argue maybe your data is not so interesting to the Russians, but that's on there. Bitdefender, like I said, great. Avast is great. AVG is great. Any of these is fine. This is not an exhaustive list. If you have Norton, Symantec, these are all good products. These are, like I said, I'm only rating the free ones. So go to any of these websites, get their free version, run a scan. What it'll do is it'll check your list of your programs against their bouncer list. Make sure you're good to go. Admin rights. I've wanted to throw this one in here. This is newer. This is something you can do on your personal computer as well. You can always watch out for it. Most things that are trying to install on your computer need permission to do it. Windows is getting better and better and better about enforcing this. If you have a Mac, I'm sorry, they don't do it quite the same, but I'm speaking to you Windows people here on this slide. When you try to do it, it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to let them do this? So in the bottom right here, you see that little image of, do you want to allow this app to make changes? That was me installing Microsoft Office. I can put in a username or password on my computer. On your computer, it's most likely going to not make you use your username and password because you're the only user, but it is going to say, are you sure? And then a lot of times it'll say, do you want to grant this program permissions to make changes to your computer? That's a big one. So if you see that, kind of like this, here's run. A lot of times the wording might change, but you'll see you get the warning and it's going to say, okay, do I want to? Now it's really important you know what you're doing. So if you're on that coupon of the day website, you're trying to download a coupon file, not to point fingers at my mother, but that's where all her viruses came from. Really make sure you trust that publisher. So in this case, hey, I'm downloading Adobe. Okay, it says it's Adobe. I can even look further. I can look at it and say, okay, it is Adobe, and that is guaranteed by Symantec. This is a licensing to Adobe. I can install it. If you get this pop-up when you're installing something or you're not installing something, it's called a drive-by download. You're on the web and all of a sudden something pops up and says, do you want to do this? The answer should always invariably be no. Never, ever let it. Most things should not need your permission to do stuff. If they're asking your permission and you didn't explicitly expect it to, it's bad. Now, a lot of times your antivirus might not have caught it yet because it's not installed and it didn't drop the bad thing or whatever it's doing. It's a Trojan horse where it's a decent program trying to put in a bad program. The moral of the story is, if you see this request, the answer should always be no unless you know you want it. That will save you from all sorts of stuff. A lot of the popular ransomwares need admin rights. That means at some point someone said, go ahead, ransomware, install. So Please be mindful of that. These are my last few slides. I'm going to burn through these here so we can, I'm a little over time, so I apologize. So you got a virus. Again, some signs you have a virus, your homepage, like we mentioned before, typing in one website takes you somewhere else. All of a sudden you start getting a bunch of icons on your desktop. Your PC is running like garbage where it normally wasn't. Programs don't work quite right. Things aren't loading, things aren't working, especially if you have an antivirus that all of a sudden starts to act weird. Control-Alt-Delete's not working. A few viruses actually will be known to cancel Control-Alt-Delete because you can do all sorts of good stuff from there. And all of a sudden, you're getting all these pop-ups for firewall permissions or malware, like the one I showed before. Do you want to make changes, or this is that, or is changing your computer? These are all huge red flags you have a virus. So what do? First things first, always disconnect from the internet. Anything that's on your computer can be fixed from your computer. So you don't want to go out there. When we talked about worms before, worms use the internet to get to other devices. So say you might have a virus, that worm is going to hop on your Wi-Fi network and look for other computers. So if you use a desktop, yank the one that looks like the phone cord out of the back. It's an Ethernet cable, RJ45 connection, Cat6, Cat5, whatever you want to call it, the one that looks like a phone cord in the back, unplug that. Step one. If you have a laptop, they usually have an airplane mode button on them. On mine, it's F7. I almost just clicked it and it would have kicked all this off, so I'm glad I didn't get touch happy, but hit that button, shut you off. Can't do either, unplug your router. Next, run a virus scan. So use that antivirus tool you have and run an on-demand antivirus. Now, you might notice you have 50 icons for antiviruses on your desktop. That's something viruses are known to do. Make sure you're running the one that you have. Next, boot it into safe mode. Most computers, the key is F8. If you have a specific type of computer, search on your phone, something like that, look for how to get into safe mode. There are ways through the menus, but we want to go as simplistically as possible when things are kind of falling apart on us. So restart your machine. As soon as it starts booting, hold that F8 key. You should get a Windows screen that looks like this. This is Windows 8 one, Windows 10, they all look very similar. Hit boot to safe mode. When you're in safe mode, things are going to look weird. Stuff's not going to load right. What it's doing is it's not loading any other programs. Rerun your antivirus from there. Now, with nothing else running, is your antivirus still saying it's clean, or it cleaned everything? It should find stuff the first time and say it cleaned them. We want to run that second scan. We want to keep scanning until we get to 0. Lastly, consider an antivirus tool that is made for this. Malwarebytes.com. Malwarebytes is a free tool that is meant to do this. It is an antivirus program that's not meant to always scan your network. It is meant to be the final thumbs up from the other scam. So look for a tool like that. If it's bad enough and there's nothing on your machine, I would always recommend re-imaging it after a virus. That gives you a restart. But this will get you back to the step where you need to be, especially if your virus is adware. These steps are fully sufficient to get you back on your trail. So last but not least, I'm going to encourage you again, if you believe you've been scammed, go ahead and file those reports with the FTC. There is a ton of good stuff on there that will help you. There are a lot of resources too. They have packets. If you stop by any of our branches, we also have ID theft packets. I usually like to give them out here, but can't do that over the digital. So all sorts of helpful stuff. The FTC is fantastic for consumer fraud. I can't recommend it enough. So I will see if there's any questions. Like I said, I know we've gone a little long. I can hang out. So if anybody did have them, I'll try to address them. If you're not interested or if you've had it, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And let's see what we've got. Nothing. All right. So if you didn't get any questions in, we do have a website. On our website, there is an option to be able to send feedback. That feedback goes to Nikki here. Nikki sits right next to me. You can throw them my way and I can get you answers. So I know we missed that opportunity, so I apologize for that. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.